Ian MacDonald, welcome to the Tread Podcast. Definitely really interested in picking your brain today. So thank you for being here.
Ben, thanks for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity of joining you.
Awesome. Well, I guess first thing for people who aren't familiar with you and maybe don't follow you on Twitter, where you have pretty decent following at this point, kind of take us through your current role, as a recruiting coordinator, and kind of how you've gotten to this point over the course of your career, and then maybe why you've kind of decided to get into kind of the college side of it versus maybe the pro scouting side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently, I serve as the associate coach at Indiana Wesleyan University. We're an NAI school, about an hour and 15 minutes north of Indianapolis. My responsibilities here, I coach our pitchers, which I love doing, but also I coordinate our recruiting efforts as well. And I think specific from a recruiting standpoint, my primary responsibility it's to build out what we call our system for identification, evaluation, recruiting, and I think it's overseeing its implementation and execution is really kind of my primary responsibility. But then at the same time working to continue to develop and build that system for what it is. And I think that's what I do primarily from a kind of job responsibility standpoint. I think the reason why I love the college game, Ben, is we got to be with these kids for an extended period of time, right? And I think it's you're with them at a really formative time in their lives, right? When they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. And I think I do love the dual responsibility of being a coach, but then also the opportunity to identify, evaluate, and recruit. Both present different, unique challenges, right? But the chance and the opportunity both is one of the reasons why I love doing what I do.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize how many hats college coaches often have to wear, especially when you're. It's maybe not like the Power Five level. It's like you have so much on your plate because you aren't necessarily at a fully funded school that has all these other pieces around you. So maybe speak to that for a minute as far as what's it like having to juggle all those different responsibilities, having to be on the road recruiting, then also having to manage a staff of 15 to 20. I'm not sure exactly how many pitchers you have, and deal with the development. And again, you're going to have some involvement with them year round, even over the course of the summer, even over the course of winter break. So how is it like? What is it like balancing those very different job responsibilities?
No doubt. Every day is different, Ben, and that's one of the reasons why I love what I do. And I think what's great about the college calendar is it comes in seasons, right? Like just say you start in the fall and you're excited to get the guys back, and the fall's a grind, right? You're with them 5-6 days a week, and you're overseeing development plans, 18, 20 guys, and then the winter hits, and it's kind of a time to recharge and maybe learn a new skill or sharpen a skill, and then the excitement of the season hits, and and now we're a little past halfway through our season, and you start feeling a little worn down, but then the excitement of recruiting hits. It just kind of comes in calendars and waves. I think the tough part is even when we're playing right now, we're 31 games into our season. We still got to recruit, right? Like I think there's a pressing responsibility to win in the season that you're in, but then also I think there's a responsibility to the coach that I have the opportunity to work for and the program, the university, to continue building future classes, right? So this is an interesting time as high school seasons kind of kick off, they get going. Where I'm doing more and more of both now, as far as from there's still an element of player development. Obviously, I think more and more time in season gets put to game planning, and then obviously the recruiting piece, it's picking up more now than ever. I was at a high school game yesterday. We're in the middle of the season, but it was a chance to sneak out. So I think there's absolutely a piece of doing both, and much more than just coaching pitchers as part of my job responsibilities.
Yeah, I think that's good for aspiring coaches to hear, especially those that want to get into the college coaching ranks. Is it's not you're not in this perfect development bubble where all you have to do all the time is focus on developing pitchers. Now at Tread, it is kind of like this perfect little environment bubble where our guys are 95% of the time is just coaching, but there's just so much duality to the college role in particular that you guys really have to be very hybrid in how you operate. So I think that's important for people to hear, kind of knowing which they want to go private sector, college, pro, kind of knowing what they're going to be getting themselves into. Kind of shift gears and talk about from maybe a high school player standpoint who's watching this, a lot of them are trying to obviously play in college, maybe Division 1, Division 2, Division 3 level, and they're really maybe not fully clear on what exactly college coaches are looking for. Obviously, they know, they're all trying to throw 95 miles an hour. They're all trying to get bigger and stronger. There's some very obvious things, but maybe we can kind of elaborate on that. Like, what are you prioritizing the most in terms of the recruiting process? Are you just looking at their stuff and you're trying to find guys that are really projectable? Are you more looking at their pitchability and, hey, I could see this guy like competing if we can, add 20 pounds, add a few miles an hour? Is it a combination? How do you evaluate talent at the high school level?
That's such a good question. I'll kind of split it two ways just for the kids listening, Ben, as far as with pitchers and position players, and hopefully shed a little bit of insight into both. I think, pitching wise, I think you're evaluating three primary buckets, and that's the first being control and command, the second being movement, the third being velocity. And I'm not putting the rankings of like what's most important, 1, 2, or 3. I think there's an element of each guy's got all three, right? And I think each guy's got a different identity as a pitcher. I think that's what I'd say from a pitching standpoint. What we're evaluating: control and command, move and velocity. I think from a hitting standpoint, we're looking at hard hit ball consistency. That's one of the things that we really value. But then secondarily, above and beyond that, plate discipline and swing decisions is another big piece. And then, above and beyond swing decisions, hard hit ball consistency, I think you're looking at, a guy that's got power in multiple parts of the field, a guy that the level of contact, the ability to hit velocity, ability to hit college level spin. And then I think from a hitting standpoint, you're looking at, how does it play in game as far as like his ability to hit and execute certain situations. So I think, every coach is going to look for something a little bit different. Those are the three buckets that we look for from a pitching side, and 5 things that we look for from a hitting side. And then, defensively and just really the player's identity, right? There's different things that we look for depending on the position. Obviously, we could go to a whole other rabbit hole there, but, I think definitely from a pitching side, and I know that's obviously what you guys have specialized in, control and command, movement, and velocity as well. Those would be the main things that we're looking for.
So how much stock do you place then in their high school stats? Is that like you just kind of completely discard it because the competition's so bad? Is it a huge red flag if a guy like doesn't dominate at the high school level? Are there any stats in particular where you're like, wow, this is extremely predictive of how they're going to compete when they actually get on campus?
Sure.
How do you process high school stats?
It's a great question. Again, I think every program is going to put different level of weight into high school stats, right? I think for us, we do put a good bit of stock into them, and I think with the disclaimer, the asterisk of all the stats that we evaluate are within context, right? So I think like the main key is like what's the level of competition like, right? Is it a 1A school or is it a 4A school, right? And even part of that is what's the consistency of competition, right? Like, do they run into a couple really good schools, but then 2/3 of the games they play are, they might not, the competition might be way different. And I think above and beyond those two things, Ben, I think, like what kind of quantity of stats do we have, right? I mean, is this across 15 games or is this across 40 games? And then I think other things go into it, like, maybe like trend of stats. Like, I don't know if you can look at just a stat line at the end of the year. And, I think I gave you clues, right? But as far as, was it a guy who got off to a slow start, who really turned it on in the back end? Those are questions that we're trying to answer. And then I think another challenge that with just, if all you did was look at stats, I think, how's that guy perform in big games and big situations, right? Maybe stat lines don't necessarily tell that. So I think they're valuable. I think they can tell part of the story. I don't think they tell the whole story, right? And what we look for from a pitching standpoint, and this is all within, okay, how many innings do they pitch? But we look at strikeout and walk, and we also are looking at extra base hits allowed. And I think ultimately we're trying to find pitchers who have, we find guys with swing and miss stuff that limit free bases and hopefully have some level of stuff to initiate weak contact or no contact. And I think from a hitting standpoint, what we're looking for is we're looking for guys with extra base hit numbers, high walk numbers, low strikeout numbers. So hitters with power, that are making good swing decisions and put the ball in play consistently. Those are the things that we value, that we look for within our program, relative to what's most important from a stat standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to hear for certain high school players, because I know when I was in high school, I felt like I had to have this perfectly manicured like ERA, and if I had one bad outing, where I gave up a few runs, it would totally throw off the entire year, and then like my chance of playing in college was like dashed if you had like one bad outing where you give up a 4 spot or something. And to hear that you're obviously looking at way more than just that cumulative stat line over the course of the entire season. You're looking at trends. You're looking at how do they perform under pressure, how do they perform against better competition, command stuff, and then kind of the entire picture. I think that's an important message where we don't need to get bogged down in, as a player at least, in the minutia of like, well, I had one bad outing, so like everything is just over. Because I know I at times suddenly got into that mentality, versus being able to kind of zoom out and see the bigger picture of like, okay, am I moving in the right direction? If I want to be a college level pitcher, am I developing and taking steps towards that every single game, towards having that type of command, having that type of composure, having that type of stuff? So maybe speak to that kind of perspective shift. Like, do you see any sort of, guys are like too focused on the short term versus taking that long term perspective?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think, like, at least for us, like if we view it kind of who you are currently as a player, and then kind of like who we think you can develop into, right? I think like when we're recruiting players, we're looking at both like what is your present ability, right? But then also like to what level is their projectability, right? Um, and I think it goes back to the point of balancing today and tomorrow. And I think like we're asking the question like, are his best days ahead of him, or are his best days behind him? And I do think there's an element of like being really good at where you're at, and I don't think that can be understated. Like, we know within the context of our program, if we have 36 to 38 guys that have performed at their high school levels against good competition, they've performed in summer ball, when they've kind of played the circuit, like there's a peace of mind knowing, hey, if we bring in 36, 38 of these guys, if I got 18 to 20 pitchers on the staff of which I coach, like we're going to be okay. But I also think like there's got to be this relenting desire to continue to develop and improve, right? Like there can't be settling for just I'm having success at this level. I think you got to realize, hey, like have awareness of what's making you good, but then also being around the right people that can help, speak into you and saying, hey, like this is where you're at and you're really good, but then, hey, looking forward, I got perspective you don't have, right? But like, what will you need in 3, 4, 5 years at the college level, maybe even beyond, that I can help you develop? And I think that's where it's, there's an importance of being the best you can be at the level in which you are at, but then also looking ahead to, hey, what is next, and what's a skill set that I need to work to continue to develop to be the best that I can be at the next level in which I'm working to have the opportunity to get to.
Yeah, I know for me in particular, because I went to a very small high school where, maybe a couple guys a decade go on to play in college. Like, I was the first Division I player to come out of my high school ever. And so, you're around players who aren't necessarily taking the game as seriously. The talent level is lower. I wasn't playing in a great conference. So within a couple of years of training, I was the best player in the conference. But I didn't necessarily see, hey, I'm having success at this current level. I'm dominating the current competition. But the second I got to college, I was the worst player on the team. And so like, I almost wish I had someone to kind of like talk that sense into me. I wasn't around great baseball in high school or growing up. So I didn't have that perspective. And so I know it was very common for a lot of other players that came in that initial recruiting class. I went to Maryland. I was a walk-on there, where they thought that they were the best player ever, right? They're all like the number 5 ranked player from their state, and they came in and they didn't play their first year, and so they like they came in with this like cocky, arrogant attitude. I don't necessarily think I came in with that type of attitude. I just came in like getting totally blindsided by the level of competition at the next step. So what would your advice be to players who maybe don't have a ton of friends who are playing Division I, haven't seen that type of competition, aren't facing 95 mile an hour fastballs at the high school level, or haven't seen anybody throwing 93 plus? um, to kind of open their mindset to what they're going to be facing at the next level.
Yeah, no doubt. I've got a couple thoughts here. I think one, watch college baseball across all levels. I think what you realize is there's really good baseball at all levels, and I think one of the best things you could do is just get a subscription to ESPN Plus. I think it's $7 or $8 a month, but you can watch different conferences, then all the way up to the Big 12 and the ACC and the SEC. All these things. I think that is super valuable. But they're not just watching them on TV, like watch them play in person. Like look at the size of those guys and kind of the speed of the game and how it increases. And then I think above and beyond that, like seek out coaches that are experienced, that have a track record of developing players, that have moved players on the next level. But hopefully above and beyond just success of moving players on, they're willing to be brutally honest with their evaluation of you as a player and like the growth areas that you have. And I think, in large part, I think like people around you shape your perspective, right? So I think if you can get around people that say, hey, you're good right now, but like this is how the game's going to change, and this is what we need to continue to develop. I think, that's what I'd push them to do. And it might not be the best travel organizations, but maybe it's playing for a smaller organization with a coach that's really good, that's really connected, and that's great with coaching your specific position group or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I would
I
definitely
think that's.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to
No,
say
go
so.
ahead.
Yeah, and we're really in many ways a product of our environments, and it dictates our perceptions and our expectations and like the standard that we set for ourselves. So even if maybe the competition in like your high school isn't great, like most people are in a city that has some sort of, maybe it's a training facility where college players train at or where some pros train at. Like find a way to get in a room or get in a weight room with players at that level, because it raises the bar. You start to see how they prepare. You start to see guys throwing around 3 plates on a squat, 4 plates on a deadlift, 5 plates on a deadlift, and it just raises the bar. You're not like, you shouldn't be the strongest person in your weight room. You shouldn't be the hardest thrower in the room. You should always be towards the low end of that totem pole if you're surrounding yourself with higher level people. So like we've had
It's
14-year-olds
so
in
good.
here,
It's so good.
with MLB All Stars like playing catch right next to them, and it just like it raises the bar and the expectation. Versus you can just surround them. They go back to school and they're just the best player on their team, and they come here and they're the weakest person, by tenfold, and it's like it just changes. It completely changes their perspective. It opens up their horizons, and so I think that's a piece too. Is just finding a way to seek out like where are the high level guys in your city training? Is there a way to get your foot in the door as an intern or just like as as a trainee at that facility, whatever the case may be. I mean, most college players, most pro players are very like receptive to asking questions, picking their brain. Like I know I certainly still am. Like we want to help, we want to kind of act as mentors for these younger kids. So again, just finding a way to like get in the same room as these players that are at that next level.
It's a great recommendation. Love that. Every bit of that.
So I'm curious from your standpoint now, just kind of shift back to, a coach's perspective.
Sure.
Everyone can identify the kids that are like just supremely talented, dominating the competition, throwing, if a kid's sitting 93 in high school, throwing 4 pitches for strikes, like you guys just frankly don't have a shot at him, right? Like everyone else sees that talent as well. Vanderbilt sees that talent. UVA sees that talent. How do you differentiate yourself? Because if you, and even then, like Vanderbilt tries to get the kids throwing 97 and they can't even get them because, the Yankees get them. So like, how do you create a competitive advantage when like everyone's looking for the same or similar things, and can identify like the absolute studs? You're not going to be able to get guys on a certain level. So how do you find that like sweet spot where you can either project that guy and develop him, or he's got something that other people aren't seeing? Like, is it kind of this aspect of Moneyball where you're like looking for these hidden things that other people aren't looking for? Like, what's the psychology of getting a competitive advantage when you're not a Power 5 school?
For sure. I think independent of level, Ben, whether you're Power 5 Division 1 or Division 3 JUCO, whatever it may be, I think like the lifeblood of any program is the ability to recruit and develop. And I think like great programs do it extremely well. I think people have an impact on success in both those realms, both recruiting and development. So I think, I think a way we can create a competitive advantage and at least be the best that we can be with the resources that we have, it's have the right systems, have the right processes in place for identification, evaluation, recruiting. But I think even more importantly, it's investing in people and the relationships that we have. I think like relationships with coaches, because ultimately they help us do our job well, right? Especially like they help us find and recruit and sign really good players. So I think there's a piece to that. Um, but I also think like above and beyond identifying and evaluating that kid, like they help us know as much as possible about the players that we're recruiting. And I think like the strength of relationships we have has a direct relationship with the quality of the information that we receive on a kid that we're recruiting. And I think that's a way we can create a competitive advantage is relationship with coaches. And I think too, Ben, um, relationships with players. I think like the recruiting process itself has become incredibly transactional. Depending on no matter what level you're at, right? It's all about what's in the best interest of me as a coach or us as a program. And um, I think there is a piece of like authenticity wins, right? Like being unapologetically who you are. I think it's caring about above and beyond recruiting the player. It's caring about them as a person. Um, it's a genuine desire for that player and that family to make the best decision for them. Um, and I think it's just being completely honest and transparent throughout the recruiting process. Um, and I think like if we have strong relationships with coaches and we have strong relationships with players, like we're setting up ourselves for success, um, in recruiting. And I think above and beyond that competitive advantage is, frankly, we're not scared of being told no, right? So like when we start the recruiting cycle, we got a pretty big net, um, and we know, hey, if we go after these fringe or these mid-major caliber Division I players at the NAI level, um, we might get told no a lot. Occasionally we're going to get ghosted, but we're going to get the guys we need to get, right? So I think there's a level of persistence and resilience of there's a lot of NAIs and Division twos, and that's just like that's the perspective I have because that's the level in which I've worked. Like, there's a lot of coaches just say, "Hey, that player's too good for us," and I think here it's working with Coach Benjamin, Coach French, Coach George. It's like, okay, great. He'd be an incredible NAI player. Let's make a run at this kid and see if we can get him. So I think relationships with coaches, relationships with players, and then just being willing to be told no. I think it's a big piece as far as hopefully what's going to lead to our success from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah, I love the answer as far as like prioritizing the honesty and the authenticity, even from the very start of the recruiting process, because there's a lot of programs, a lot of recruiters where they'll tell guys exactly what they want to hear. They'll tell them like the 10 out of 10 version of like, well, if you come here, you're going to hit 400, you're going to get drafted in the 12th round. Like they give you this, they paint this picture of like everything goes perfectly. Um, and sometimes promising playing time and then not giving guys playing time. Like there can be a lot of deception in the recruiting process, and I've seen it firsthand with players that we've worked with, or even players that I've played with myself throughout my career. So I love that you're coming from that place, and I think that has been lost in a lot of places. And I think players can feel that. Players can feel when a coach doesn't care about them, but if they're not going to come in caring about you, so you have to go out and care about them first, and then they'll reciprocate that relationship. So if you can create that relationship, which it sounds like you guys really prioritize from the very start, now they're going to feel that loyalty to the program, to you, and they're going to be less likely to just up and transfer if they don't start their very first year, because that's also the tendency as well. Coaches treat it transactionally, and now the players are like, well, if I don't play every single game my first year, like I'm out. And it's just like this revolving door at a lot of programs.
That's so good, and I think one of the things that I always tell kids, if I'm working camps or whatever it may be, and you got 60 seconds to make an elevator pitch and give these kids advice, it's evaluate every opportunity independent of level or division or classification. And I think above and beyond evaluating every opportunity and trying to create opportunities at different levels, I think it's like make a decision for more than baseball, right? I think like when you see a lot of kids going in the portal, and I mean that's something we can get into if you want to, but like from a portal standpoint, is like a lot of times it's baseball driven decisions. That's the reason why they went to the school, and it's the reason why they're leaving the school. And I think there's an element to that, right? Because I think like baseball will have a huge impact on your college experience, right? But I think at the same time, like looking beyond athletics, academically, socially, financially, like is this the best fit for you? And it's to have a level of maturity saying, hey, this might be my only Division I opportunity, but I've got great opportunities at Division II NAIA levels. Like maybe that is a better fit. Like not just in the 4 years, but like in 40 years and like your lifetime, right? Like what's the best fit? What's the best opportunity for you? And I completely agree with you. I think the recruiting process got transactional on both sides, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I think it just is the way that it is. But I challenge players just from their evaluation of opportunities and the situation in which they're in. Take a big approach than just evaluating the baseball opportunity to make the best decision that you can, and then have as much satisfaction in the place of wherever you go.
So I love that you brought up how a lot of players think that they have to play Division I baseball. Like that was very much like my perception in high school because it was like, well, if I'm going to play college baseball, I want to play at the highest level, and I didn't necessarily understand how competitive Division II baseball was, or how competitive even like mid-major D1s were. I thought I had to play at like a Power Five. I didn't understand there's still guys that get drafted out of Division III baseball, and I've coached big leaguers now that didn't come out of Division I schools. So maybe we can speak to this kind of misconception that like you have to play Division I. I know, just speaking from experience, like I was lucky enough to develop just in time to be able to go to a walk-on tryout at Maryland and to be able to have a coach that saw some potential in me. Even though, I was a mid-80s lefty, a low slot funky mid-80s lefty, but like he very easily could have not seen the potential there. Like I was very, very fringe, and I was lucky enough to bet on myself, to go to the school for the academics, think I'm going to be able to actually walk on, make the team, and then stick it out for 4 years. We can maybe talk about how common transferring is, but there were 15 or 16 freshmen that class, and I think there were 5 of us at the end of those 4 years, and I was the worst player on the team, and I stuck it out, and I became one of the top 5 players on the team by my senior year. But I've also thought about it a lot since that point, and for me, the best thing probably would have been to play at like a mid-major, and actually played by like my first year or second year, instead of essentially riding the bench for 2.5 years, 2.5 to 3 years before playing. So how do players make that call? Maybe they are getting like some nibbles from mid-majors or some nibbles from D1 schools, but they're getting really solid offers from Division IIs or Division IIIs or even NAIAs. How do they make that decision, and how common do you see this kind of misconception that you have to play D1, or like there's no future to your baseball career?
That's such a good question. I think like if you look at the numbers, obviously Division I's the level sending the most players on a professional baseball, right? There's no doubt. So I don't want to be the guy that sits back and say, like, okay, I think there's a piece of it though, of really taking stock into like where am I going to develop the most? And I think like in order to develop, you need to be able to pitch and perform, right? So I think there is a piece of, hey, if you're a fringe Division I caliber pitcher, right, and maybe you got a couple feelers, couple nibbles, maybe preferred walk on. I'm not in a position to tell a kid don't take that opportunity. Like I don't know what's best for that player, that family. But I think they do need to realize is like, I think if you look across the board, there's going to be enough facilities, there's going to be enough resources, whether you're at Division I or Division II. Like those things are going to be comparable. And like, what's a separator in your development? I think it's the people in which you're around. I think it's in coaches in which you've had the opportunity to play for. I think it's the players in which you have the opportunity to build relationships, train alongside. So I think like my recommendation to a player, whether it's Division I, Division II, NAI, Division III, whatever it may be, is like where's the place that you're going to pitch, and where's the place that you're going to develop. Because I think like if you go somewhere you can do both those things, you have. And I'm not saying go somewhere where it's easy to get on the field, Ben. I'm saying like go somewhere where there's competition, like, but there's also opportunity. And I think there's some places where all there is competition. There's no opportunity, right? So it's like go somewhere where there's competition and opportunity to get in the field, but then also somewhere where it's going to be a coaching staff. You're going to have teammates that push you to be develop into and become the best player that you can be. And whether that's at Division One or a different level, I think great opportunities exist at every level.
Yeah, one of my pieces of advice to players is, again, go where you're going to develop, but also go where if you have a bad outing, you're not going to just automatically be benched for the rest of the season. Because if you're at like a Florida State, a UVA, you're just another 88, 92 guy, and you have a bad outing or two, like you're done. They have so many other guys ready to step up and take that position. If you lose trust in a coach at a school like that, where you're not just like the dude on 75% scholarship, you get benched for the season. I've seen it firsthand with dozens of guys. So for me, I was very much in that role my senior year, which I happened to just like not have any bad outings. Like I happened to just like get through the end of the season with like a 1.5 ERA and like keep doing just enough to stay on the field so that I could get drafted. But had I had one bad outing, like I was going to be benched the rest of the season, and I was aware of that. And so like I was very much like skating on thin ice the entire time, and I was able to somehow put it together. But it could have just as easily not worked out in my favor. Versus had I been at a mid-major, like I would have been a top 5 pitcher on the team, from my probably sophomore or junior year on. So I would, even if I had a bad outing or two, like I'm still getting playing time. I'm not having to constantly worry about just getting on the field. I can focus on like, okay, bad outing. What do I need to do to change it for next week when I have my next outing? Versus bad outing, I'm going to be benched for the next 2 months, and I'm throwing in inter squads. So that's a consideration too. It's not necessarily like you can't have the D1 versus D2 versus D3 conversation, but you can also have the Power 5 versus mid-major or whatever level you're at. Like you're going to have your reach schools where you may not play, and if you have a bad outing, you're benched. And you're going to have the schools that are kind of in that sweet spot where it's good competition, it's going to push you. You're probably towards the top third of the pack, where you're a little bit safer in terms of your playing time. And then you're going to have the schools where like you're way overqualified for it. You don't need to be the top guy on the field day one, just killing everybody. So it's finding that sweet spot, I think, is the key.
Absolutely. And I do think, Ben, it's like scouts are really good at what they do, right? So like if you go make the decision instead of playing at a mid-major, you're going to go play at a successful Division II or NAI program. Like if you can play and you're draft eligible or sign eligible, like, and you put up numbers, like you're successful in the level in which you're at, and you have the skill set to play at the next level, and you have coaches that are willing to help facilitate that, and you have the video and you have the data, like there's more opportunity than ever. And I think even just like what you guys are doing with the pro days, it's an incredible example of that, right? Like, I mean, these guys are coming from all different places, all different levels. And it's a testament to what you guys are doing. But I think just in 2023, the avenues to get a chance to play pro ball, it's so different for every guy, right? An opportunity exists at every level.
All the tools out there now, like create a relatively even playing field. Like if you have the pitch metrics, the velocity, you come to an event like a pro day type event. Like we're gonna have a college pro day this summer. Everyone's being evaluated on an equal playing field. If you're coming in throwing 93-mile-an-hour bowling balls with great command of 3 pitches, like, okay, well, there's a D1 guy that's throwing 91 miles an hour with okay command of 2 pitches. Like, okay, they're going to take the better pitcher, and they can evaluate that, and they can recognize that because of the analytics, because of all these predictive models that say like this pitch will play at the next level and they can say that with confidence now. It's not like, maybe it's more difficult with hitters. I don't spend much time working with hitters, but with pitchers, you can really evaluate like how this arsenal should play at the next level. And you don't necessarily have to see them perform against, for years and years and years to make that conclusion, because we can know, hey, this is where MLB stuff ranks, and here's how his stuff ranks relative to that. So again, there's just circling back, it comes back to go where you can develop. Go where you're going to be around a staff that gives you the resources, tools, personalities that fit what you need to develop. And just to bring up another misconception, again, if a guy can play at a Power 5, like go play at a Power 5. Especially if you're getting like some scholarship money, that's a good sign you're going to play at a Power 5 if they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. But there's this misconception that like really fancy facilities and bells and whistles equals development. And I understand like it's really cool. Like we wanted to get nice facilities. We ultimately were able to get nice facilities. It's like a great recruiting tool for players at the college level, um, but it's not the same as actually having good development. You can have an amazing weight room. It doesn't mean you actually have the staff in place to apply those tools to get players better. You can have a dingy weight room with a great strength coach, great, personality, great mind, who understands how to get these players better with a tenth of the tools. Like an LSU or UVA or FSU, like don't get me wrong, like there are great people at all these Power Five schools, but there's also examples where it's a strength coach who doesn't know what he's doing, but he's got a $10 million weight room. So there's lots of examples, and it's way more about like what you said, picking the right coaching staff, picking the people, versus just picking like the fancy bells and whistles facility. With some exceptions, like maybe if they don't even have a TrackMan unit, like that could be a detriment because that's such an advantage to like learning a new pitch. Maybe if they don't have like any sort of like video camera or slow motion, or like there's a couple of tools that are probably needed, but like a fancy custom weight room is not really one of the criteria that you should probably be looking at. Even though, again, when I was in high school, I was like, that's so cool. I have to go to these like places that have all this cool stuff. It's really not, because you get to a place like that, and if the pitching coach isn't a good fit for you, or the strength coach isn't a good fit for you, or the head coach isn't a good fit for you, then you're just stuck in this really bad situation, and then you have to transfer.
Really well said. Really well said.
So I'm curious from an evaluation standpoint to kind of go back to that. Are there any like hard cutoffs? I know you kind of you're looking at everything holistically. You're looking at command, you're looking at their stuff, you're looking at their mental makeup. From let's say, for example, fastball velocity standpoint, are there any like hard cutoffs where like if a guy's under a certain like these certain metrics, you're not even going to look at him, and maybe that changes by level.
Yeah.
So at your level, what might that cutoff be?
It's interesting, Ben, because I think it depends on the level, but then also depends on the competitiveness at that level, right? So like some guys are gonna have the luxury of even if you just say, hey, within the same conference, there might be one program at the top of the conference that can go after kind of a player with a better skill set than the team at the bottom, right? So I think it depends on the level and the competitiveness at the level. I also think like, for us, I think, and this is important, I think, for kids to hear is it's like, okay, you say a kid or a coach says, this guy tops out at this number, right? So like that's his peak. Well, I think we're trying to figure out, is this where a guy tops out at, or is it like, hey, this guy's in our program pitching in a game, that's what he's sitting in a game
Right.
to hitters who are trying to do damage, right? And then I
Yeah,
think,
that's what actually matters.
is this in a bullpen or is this in game, right? And then like, okay, how much of a variance is there start to start, right? The beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and how long does a velocity holding game, right? I think there's a lot of questions, again, seeking out context within, hey, like what is the threshold? I don't want to be, I'm not going to be the coach or the guest that downplays velocity, because undoubtedly it's important, right? Like, you go to Lake Point or Grand Park and there's a bunch of coaches with radar gun, like it's absolutely a piece to the puzzle. Um, but I do think there's, it's always within context is what I want to make sure the point I drive home. And I do think, for us, like we absolutely have, hey, like what's the standard in our program? Like the kids that we're signing that we have access to, like what is that guy from a velocity standpoint? And I think every program has that. But then also maybe there's a kid who doesn't throw as hard, but the pitchability is off the charts, right? Or there's a crazy level of projectability, or there's like a level of deception where it's like, man, this guy, he gets a lot of swings and misses, a lot of weak contact. Like he's a really uncomfortable at bat. So it's like, I think it's evaluating every player for who they are. It's not chasing one kind of pitcher. I think there's definitely pieces of, hey, like what do I want each pitcher in our program to have? I think like there is a velocity threshold to that extent, but then not being blinded by just velocity as a number, but also looking, hey, like, okay, there are guys that we play against that give us problems, our offense. And it's like, is that guy giving us problems because of how hard he throws? Or it's like the pitch mix that he has, his ability to move the
Right.
ball in and out. Like, so I think there's absolutely a velocity threshold, but I think there's a lot of asterisks all around it as far as, what is velocity? And then, you know, do we take a shot on a guy with lower velocity but do other things super well?
Right. And again, velocity is one of those things that everybody's looking for. It's like if someone knew nothing about recruiting and they just owned a radar gun and they would still know, like, look at velocity. So like you can't you have to have a more nuanced approach to that if you want to gain any sort of competitive advantage and develop a team around more than just velocity. And I know there's
For
lots of,
sure.
even through my experience playing college, like, we were the team that, for whatever reason, like, our staff had really recruited like hard throwing guys, but a lot of them, they're on big scholarships, but maybe didn't have the pitchability side of it initially, and so that was like the focus of their development. But then you face other
Mm.
schools, like maybe a Clemson would be a good example, where they placed a high priority on like upper 80s guys who just dominated at every level and just had really high pitchability. And so it was interesting to see like how some of these differently constructed teams kind of like fared against each other in competition. And it can go both ways, right? Like you recruit enough 95-mile-an-hour guys, like a few of them are going to figure out how to pitch, and then you got some problems for other teams. And you recruit enough like 88-mile-an-hour guys that dominated in high school, like some of them are going to figure out how to still dominate at the next level. Some of them, their stuff won't quite play as well. So it's just interesting that there's kind of a personality to what different types of recruiters look for and how they construct their teams. Again, that probably feeds into
No
the
doubt.
development too. Like if you can develop velo, maybe recruit the pitchability guys because you can add 3, 4, 5 miles an hour. If you can develop command, maybe recruit the velo guys because you can help them throw strikes. So maybe speak
Yeah.
to that side of things too. Do you factor in like what are your strengths developmentally in terms of the type of players that you look for?
I think that's a huge piece to it, Ben. And I think this is kind of another challenge of just being at the college level versus maybe the pro level where we've got, tons of minor league teams and we can take on, 100 plus pitchers, whatever it may be, right? Like I think for us, we carry 36, 38 guys. I have 18 to 20 pitchers any given year. We're a program, we're fortunate. We have very little turnover across the board. So, like, we have retention over 90% in the 7 years that Coach Benjamin's been here. So, like, we're bringing in 4 to 5 pitchers every year. It's pretty predictable, right? The challenge for us is we play 4 games on a weekend, every weekend, and we play midweeks. So it's like any given week, we got 10, 11, 12 guys pitching out of maybe the 18, 19, 20 in our program. So it's like we might be able to take a shot, one guy on a year of like, hey, this the guy's got outlier stuff, but like it's not quite there yet as far as like our ability to trust putting that guy in a game and that guy's going to give us a chance to be successful. So I do think like, and that's probably why we go back to prioritizing like who they are right now. It's just like we need them like to be good right now. And in college, we get 3 to 4 years. Some of our guys are graduating in 3 years. You're coming in with a bunch of college credits. So it's like the timeline of development for us compared to maybe a pro organization, it's completely different, right? Like it's more challenging. So, I do think it's figuring out, hey, like what leads to the greatest level of success on the field, right? And I think velocity is absolutely like a huge piece of that. But I also think this, like, if a guy doesn't have pitchability or he can't command the baseball or at bare minimum control the baseball coming in at 18 years old, it's going to be really hard for him to just within 2 to 3 years, like help him figure out how to move the ball in and out or throw the breaking ball for a strike. So I think for us, we put a value, we put an emphasis on the pitchability of a player. And we know that, Jeff Schmidt, who's their strength coach, who has worked with Zach DeCan at TCU, like incredible strength coach. It's like, if we just bring guys in with somewhat projectable bodies and get them in the weight room for 12 months at a time, they're going to take a huge stride their freshman year. So I do think it's figuring out, like, what can you successfully develop? How quick can you develop that? And like what leads to the greatest amount of success in game. And I think that's what every coach, every staff, the questions that they're asking themselves, that impacts the decisions that they make.
Yeah, I will say at least from my perspective, like of all these different factors, like which are the easiest to develop, the velocity side of things is one of the easier things to develop when you compare it to like pitchability. Like it's
For
not
sure.
that you can't improve pitchability, like you certainly can, But it's
No doubt. No
it's
doubt.
much harder to develop. Now, adding a second to third pitch, again, more technical than just getting a guy throwing harder, getting him bigger, getting him stronger. But again, very, very doable to tweak a guy's grip, get him a cutter, get him a slider if he doesn't have one. Like adding pitches, adding off-speed pitches, adding 20 pounds, adding 50% strength in the weight room, like adding velo. We've at least found that part very, very repeatable and relatively easy to develop that
Mm.
side of things. The pitchability side, you can certainly address the mental side, their routines. You can put them in, more game-specific environments in their training. Like you can do some things from that standpoint, but you might nudge the needle, 10%, whereas you can nudge the needle a lot more from the velo side. So if I was in the college coaching ranks, like I would probably be more on the side of like the pitchability, recruiting pitchability, knowing that we can develop the velocity side.
And I think that this is, and I think every coach would probably agree in a lot of ways, right? I think this is the challenge, right? When you go on PBR, you're not seeing, hey, like, what's this guy's zone percentage, right? Or what's his strike percentage or whatever.
Right.
Maybe you're looking at like, what's his velocity? What's
Right. That's what you get. That's
his
the main headline.
So, no doubt. So it's harder. It's like it's easy to find. Hey, we want guys with pitchability, but it can be tough to evaluate just with. We might only see a pitcher twice before we have to make a decision. Like we might see him on two of his best days. We might see him on two of his worst days. So it's easy to define. It might be harder to evaluate. But I tell you, it's a challenge because it's harder to do than just look at a number and say this guy's up to this velocity. But I do think it, in a lot of ways, especially at our level at NAIA, like, I'm not saying, again, I'm not discrediting the importance of velocity, but like, I think there's an increased level of importance at the smaller college level from a pitchability standpoint.
What are some red flags that you see in the recruiting process where you may be very interested in the kid's stuff, you're very interested in his ability to contribute to your staff at the next level, but something you find out something about him, or he does something in the game, or like something happens where it's a red flag, immediately cross his name off the list. What are some examples of those things that you've seen, through your recruiting history that you've heard other coaches kind of use as red flags, and how can high school players make sure they don't kind of fall into those buckets?
Man, that's good. I think this is the challenge, Ben. I'm not sure it's necessary as cut and dry as like it's black and white of if you do this, then right. I think there's context with every situation, with every player. I will say this, like with absolute certainty, there's some behaviors that make us ask more questions than others, right? And I'd say like the biggest turnoff for us, just from like a personality or a makeup standpoint, is like if there's a lack of respect or a lack of gratitude, and whether that's a lack of respect for the game, a lack of gratitude for the people around him, or even a lack of respect for the people around him, I think it definitely makes us ask questions. I don't know if there's much that where it's like, hey, we just absolutely write off a player if he slams his helmet or if he slams his glove after he gives up a 3 weak shingles up the middle that get through. I mean, I think there's always like we're asking why, like what invoked that reaction, right? And maybe it's coming from a good place, but like that kid he's not channeling it the right way. But maybe no one's ever taught him, hey, like you shouldn't do this, or this is how you channel. You can show emotion, but in the dugout bathroom instead of on the field, right? Like I think there's context with every situation. I think we got to remind ourselves, like these kids are 16, 17, 18 years old when we're recruiting them. Like they're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. The people, I think the experiences around each kid, it's so different. So, I think if we're asking the question why, like what invoked the reaction, and then like what if, so like they do become a part of our program. Like, is this behaviors that we can correct, right? Where if they're around people who care, around people that are going to hold them accountable and set standards. Like, is this a kid who's going to be willing to change, right? Like, is there an element of like he's willing to be taught? He wants to be developed. There's a desire to learn. Like, if it's that kid, he can make mistakes, and we'll address it in the recruiting process. We don't shy away from that. If we dig something up, we go right to it. But then maybe it's okay. Well, this is what happened. Now, like, what did you learn from this? Like, how has this changed your perspective? Has this happened again since it happened before? Right? I think there's, um, it's not as simple as black and white, cut and dry. I think we're always trying to find context within each of those things.
Is it safe to say though, it's not black and white, but if a kid is perceived as potentially having an attitude issue, they're not doing themselves any favors in the recruiting process, right? Like
No,
two guys
no,
that throw 85, the guy that's perceived as having an attitude problem is going to get overlooked for the other guy who's perceived as having a great attitude. Like it's not doing you any favors, even if there are going to be schools that will ask deeper questions, and still possibly take a chance.
I think that's absolutely fair, right? And I think like reality is, especially like if, and I don't let this come across the wrong way. If there's like it's an average level of ability, and you can take a guy with very few concerns, right? I think a lot of it comes down to like what's the risk involved, right? Like if there's risk from a personality standpoint, and
Right.
I can get the same player where there's little to no risk. Like every guy we're talking, the coaches we're talking with, the parents we're talking with, the parents of the player or the guardians of the player himself. Like if you can choose one or two question marks, no question marks, I think you're going with the guy without question marks, right?
Right.
So now, like if you have the chance where you can get in the door with a player of high with greater potential, I think that's where there's probably wrestling,
Right. If you
right?
can get
Where
like
it's
a Bryce Harper type guy where he's got some things to work through, but he's extremely talented. Like again, those guys are going to have opportunities wherever they go until they figure it out. And so obviously like the ability
100%.
factors in too. I definitely
Absolutely.
want to kind of speak to the social media side of things because I have never been in the kind of college recruiting realm, but I have been in the hiring realm in the private sector. So we're still going over job applicants and stuff. And one of the things that will disqualify somebody from who we would otherwise be interested in like pushing along through the interview process is like if it's just a really toxic social media presence, because it's like a living resume of how you treat people, how you interact with people. And we have been in the situation where like we like the resume, we like the applicant, they can do a good breakdown, and then you go through the references, you go through the social media, and it's just like toxic, it's drama, it's seeking out controversy, and it's just like a risk you can't take if you're gonna look at these other amazing applicants. You're gonna take the person that doesn't have a toxic social media presence. I don't know if you even go down that route and look at their social media, but that's just one of these easy things to control. It might be hard in the moment for a young kid to control slamming his helmet or slamming his glove in the dugout, but you can certainly control how you interact with people on social media, and that's just like such an easy thing to control.
That's such a good point. And I think even, I guess to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going on Twitter and Instagram searching for the kids. Above and beyond what they tweet, like what do they like? Who do they follow? Right? Like those are all things that we're looking at where it can tell you a lot. And I do remember 3 years ago when I was at the University of Charleston, we walked away from a kid because of the accounts that he was following. Just completely inappropriate, right? So it's like that made us ask a lot of questions, the point at which we kind of backed out. We were uncomfortable with. So, it absolutely plays a part. It's something that I think most college coaches are looking at. At minimum, like we look at who follows that kid, so we can maybe have intel on who's potentially talking with that kid or who's recruiting that kid, right? And then, I think even just like from what he's liking, if he's liking subject things, or maybe it's something that he doesn't even that could possibly be perceived as taken with different context or taken a different way. It's just like just don't interact with it, right? Like maybe you bookmark it or DM to yourself. If that's what you just don't make it public. Like, realize what is public, and I think that that's a good point, Ben. And I think it's something you do need to be aware of because all these kids are on social media.
100%. What are some other misconceptions you would say that high school players have about college baseball that like it's just like a slap in the face when they get to college baseball? Like I had no idea this is what it was going to be like. Like for example, one thing I can kind of come up with is like I had this perception like I was going to have time for maybe doing some extracurricular activities like really focused on academics and like you think that there's going to be time for all this stuff, and then you realize real quick it's like, at least at the Power 5 level, like it is athletic first, like that is like 90% of your time, and then you better find time to do your academics, and then like good luck having a social life, good luck like getting enough sleep. So are there any major misconceptions that you've seen where they just like don't understand what they're getting themselves into?
Well, I think building off the point you just said, Ben, I remember our pitching coach in college said, there's academics, athletics, and there's social experience. And like you can do two or three well, but you can't do all three, right? So you've got to choose, you've got to prioritize. And I think what it needs to be is it needs to be academics and athletics. That's especially if athletics is a vehicle for you to receive a degree, right? Like those need to be your two priorities. I think from a baseball standpoint, misconception wise, kids might underestimate how hard the game does get, right? Like everything's played at a faster speed, right? Like if you're a hitter, velocities are harder, spin is sharper, right? Like if you're a pitcher, hitters are more physical. They're going to hit the ball harder, right? So I think the game being played at a different speed, and I don't know, and we talked a little bit about that earlier in the conversation. It can be tough to prepare a kid for that, other than just him going somewhere and getting that experience, right? I think another misconception is how hard it can be to get into a lineup. Like when you think about it, all these rosters, no matter what level you play at, they're top performers, like you said, like in your city, in your area. So realizing, hey, like I go from the best player in the team, in the conference, in the county, and now all of a sudden I'm playing with the best players in the team, the conference, the county, right? So how hard it is to get in the lineup, especially when you're young, and then even how hard it is to stay in the lineup, especially if you're in highly competitive programs. Like you do have to perform, right? Because there's gonna be other guys that are as the level. I should say this: the gap in level of ability when you're at high school, it's here. The gap in level of ability when you're in college, it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. So I think realizing the challenge of how hard it is to get into the lineup and how hard it is to stay in the lineup is real. I think academically, like there is more on your plate than what you've ever experienced, right? So like realizing the importance of time management, and then twofold, Ben, like realizing the level of independence, right? Like there's no one there that's, I mean, yeah, we're getting grade reports, right? But like, there's like it's on you to be organized, to manage your time well, to get things turned, to work at a level. So I think that's always an adjustment, especially that fall of freshman year. Kind of hits kids in the head like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. And then I just think the final piece, kind of like I mentioned, as I kind of began my response to this, like baseball and academics need to take a priority over social life. And I'm not saying don't have a social life. I think they're absolutely like that's a part of the college experience, right? But it's where are you putting your time? Like what's most important to you? And from that standpoint, it needs to be academics and athletics.
Yeah, I definitely think there's still plenty of time to have fun with your teammates, and like that kind of becomes a little bit of a social aspect as well. Like your locker room time like is a social aspect. Like getting dinner with your teammates is a social aspect. So it doesn't trying to keep up with like the non-student athletes is like that's really where guys start to like fall off. Is like going out on Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights. Like it starts to really add up after a while. Like going out with your teammates, like occasionally, okay, those guys all end up fine. But having like made it through, like having seen so many guys fall off through my experience, and like I was one of the last standing, which you wouldn't have expected. Like the walk-on worst guy on the team was, one of the last players standing. Like it really does come down to what you said. Like taking this whole thing as a job, taking it seriously. There is going to be time for fun, but like making sure you take care of business in the classroom, on the field, and then if there's a little bit of time left over, like okay, then you go sleep. And there is a little bit of time left over. Okay, now maybe we go like some social aspects, but you're just not going to be able to keep up with, the non-student athletes. It's going to seem like, wow, they have unlimited time. What do they even do all day? They're taking 15 credits and don't have to be at the field for 5 hours a day, 4 hours a day. Don't have to be on the road every week in season. So I think that's great advice. One thing that I definitely didn't realize was I kind of took for granted that I thought I was going to have the same coaching staff all 4 years.
Mhm.
And after the second year, the coaching staff completely switched up like in a week. Eric Bakich took a job with Michigan, took the pitching coach with him. We're just like sitting there, middle of summer ball, and we're like, what are we going to do? Like, who's our coach going to be? And I just hadn't considered that, there is relatively high turnover. Maybe not, certain programs probably have more stability, but at other programs, like, again, coaches are trying to work their way up through their careers as well. And so when, a good opportunity arises, they're going to take it. And so knowing in the back of your mind, hey, I am going to the school for this coaching staff, but there's things can always change, things can always pivot. And what am I going to do in that situation if that does arise?
No, absolutely. That's so good.
What would you say then? There's a lot of players out there that place a lot of emphasis on going to showcases to get seen. Like they're trying to figure out the best way to get in front of coaching staffs. So there's kind of a bunch of different avenues now, right? There's like the directly emailing a coach or DMing a coach. There's the go on Twitter and just like upload all your videos and tag Flackround and like just try to go like the free route and get seen that way. Then there's the paid route, which is still very popular. Just go to a bunch of perfect game events, play for a showcase team, and try to get seen that way. Do you have a preference in terms of, or other college recruiters that have a preference in terms of which way they find out about a guy? Or as long as they find out about a guy, it doesn't really matter. Like if they have video, maybe TrackMan data, and they see him play in person a couple times, like is that enough? Or are the kids that play on these showcase teams like is it really worth the investment to do that?
Great questions. I think that touching on the first part from an event standpoint, I absolutely think select events can definitely accelerate a player's recruiting process, right? Like if you go down WWBA and you're flashing 93, I mean, I've heard stories where guys go from teams hardly know about this guy, and then this guy's getting Power 5 opportunities. So like that's real, and I don't want to downplay that. There are absolutely certain events that can do that. I think what's good, Ben, is 2023. Like, there's more ways than ever to be identified, right? So, like, what is amazing is you can get on a TrackMan or like take a radar gun with literally an iPhone, and all of a sudden you can post it to Twitter. It gets caught on by the right accounts, or even maybe your travel organization retweets it, and literally in a matter of 24 hours, like things happen, right? Like, so I think like in 2023, especially, like talent's being identified more ways than ever before. So, I'm even just thinking back to like the class that we have as freshmen. And I put a tweet out on this, this summer, and it was really received well. But it's like, when we identified that class, I mean, we identified some kids on Twitter. There was a kid specifically where he tweeted it and his travel organization retweeted it, and we were following the travel organization. That's how we found him. Another one, PBR, like showcase event. They have social media coverage. They post it with numbers, and that's how we initially identified that guy. And then a majority of our leads come from relationships with coaches and instructors, right? So like we're initiating contact with them. We're encouraging them to initiate contact with us if and when they have a player that they think might be a good fit. So above and beyond like social media and relationships, we also sign guys based off inbound emails where they did email us. And it's like the old school way of like being identified. But like if we have an email where in the subject line is like 90 mile per hour fastball, 1,000% of the time we're opening it, watching video, and diving deeper, right? And then above and beyond that, like I think most coaching staffs, I mean, we subscribe to PBR and we can do advanced search in there. So like attending, and this is not a paid promotion for PBR, but like PBR Perfect Game, like those events can be valuable. And then camps and showcases, like that's real. We identify guys that way that we eventually recruited and signed. So I think that there's more ways than ever, and I think I love that it's that way, right? Because like maybe it used to be, hey, the only way to be seen is going to these showcases or paying and hiring an advisor. Where now it's social media, it's free, email, it's free. Like there's all these things that you can do where it's like at the end of the day, I don't think any coach has preference of how they find you versus if they find you, right? That's what's most important, is that they find you. So no matter what avenue or outlet that's coming through, I think there's more ways than ever.
Yeah. For me, one of the things that I tell guys is like, generally the limiting factor to why you're not at the next level of your career is that you're not good enough. It's not usually that you haven't politicked enough. It's that you haven't like figured out all these little tips and tricks. It's not that those things can't help on the fringes. That's like the 1%, like having a really good attitude, knowing people, spending money on showcase, like that will help on the fringes. But generally the limiting factor is being good enough. Like, can you imagine if like Garrett Cole was not Garrett Cole, but there was just a random Garrett Cole in like Siberia throwing 99 miles an hour strikes? It literally takes like 360p video of Garrett Cole with a radar gun in it, like for 5 pitches, and someone's gonna find him. He'll be in the minor leagues for a month. Then he's like, if you're good enough, you're good enough. Somebody will find you. And so, again, I think there is value to a lot of the showcase stuff, like at certain times, especially for the kid who has made huge developmental strides and just he's waiting to explode, but he needs that breakout moment in front of a lot of teams or scouts to finally explode. But for parents that, of these kids that maybe have very limited resources, like I didn't have very many resources in high school, so I wasn't going to spend all those resources, like the couple $1,000 a year or whatever, like I could possibly spend on showcases. I was going to spend that on my development and just have faith that once I was good enough, the pieces would fall into place. And so that's, for me, that's what happened. Like I didn't go to showcases. I ended up just barely developing to like, I was like a low 80s guy as a junior. I finally got to be like a mid 80s guy as a senior. I had a really good season. We won our championship, whatever. And so I had no offers, but I emailed Eric Bakich, the head coach at University of Maryland, because that was one of my top final schools. I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out which school I want to go to. I'm going to walk onto that school, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to play there for 4 years, and I'm going to get drafted. So I'm going to do that.
Awesome.
So I chose Maryland didn't have a spot on the team, but I had to commit to it because I had no offers. I sent him an email. It was like 87 mile per hour lefty, because I hit 87 like once. So I was like trying to get his attention. So 87 mile an hour lefty, championship article. And so I linked the article that said how, I threw 7 innings, 14 Ks, no runs. We won the championship. I put video or whatever, and I said, I'm coming to your recruiting camp, next month. Like, be on the lookout. I'm going to make your team, or something to that effect. So when I get to this camp, which like recruiting camps typically aren't really recruiting, like most of the time, at least for Power Fives, they kind of pay attention, but like it's mostly like money making. Like it's how they pay the assistants. So they're not really expecting to, like, they're pleasantly surprised if someone comes through these camps, but they're not really expecting to find anybody. So I'm at this camp with like 100 people, and he doesn't know anybody at the camp except me, because I sent him the email, and he knew that there was an 87 mile an hour lefty coming, and this tall, skinny lefty that's got a weird delivery is like there and striking everybody out, throwing 85. So the email thing actually did, because I was on the fringes, like that whole game really did help. But it's because I spent all 4 years of high school focusing on development, not playing a bunch of showcases, throwing 80, 81, 82 miles an hour. I spent the very limited resources I had developing. And then once I felt like I was ready to finally cash those chips in, that's when I, tried to go through kind of the recruiting process. Do I wish I had been throwing that hard like a year earlier or 2 years earlier? Like, absolutely, because I would have had way more options. But it just didn't work out that way. I wasn't good enough. And so I waited until I was developed, or at least at the minimum threshold I needed to be, before I then, started focusing on the recruiting.
No, that's so good. What an awesome story too. And it's pretty cool and I think the kids need to hear those stories, right? Because that's pretty inspiring, I think, to a lot of different people.
So what's your take then on, we kind of shift gears, talk about the transfer process, because there's, I would say certainly a trend where a lot of players will just like jump ship at the first sign of like not getting as much playing time as they want. And maybe that's a, indictment on this generation, or maybe we can just say it's their fault. But maybe it's also a sign of the transactional relationship and coaches as well, not building that loyalty. But then there also are situations where, a player really isn't getting the development they need. They're not getting the playing time, the ability to, get to their long-term goals, and they probably should transfer. Like, that might be the best thing for them. How do they decide if, hey, is this like the player just not showing loyalty and not sticking it out. Like I stuck it out for 4 years, but that could have very easily backfired on me
Mm.
versus just getting out of there after the first year. How do they know whether they should maybe stick it out or whether it's just a bad situation, and this is really a time to jump ship?
It's a really good question. I think the first thing I'd say, Ben, is every situation is different. And I, at least my perspective, I'm not judgmental of the players that choose to transfer. I'm not judgmental of the players that choose to stay. I think it's the kid's decision, it's the family's decision. I think what can't be ignored is it is more prevalent now than ever, right? Especially at Division One, the Power Five levels. Um, this is the challenge I think with transfers is there's three kinds of transfers, right? There's guys who played that didn't perform. There's guys that played um, who haven't had the chance to perform, right? So it's like yeah, you got opportunities and you didn't perform, or you haven't gotten opportunities, or it's like there are players that are transferring that have played and have performed. Um, I think this is the challenge. I think a lot of players in the portal, it's the players that haven't played or they're players that haven't performed. I think there's certainly legitimate reasons why players transfer. Ben, I think that probably the most common, and I think the one like with that I can certainly like identify and relate to, but it's like there's a different experience than what was advertised, right? It's like what you thought you were signing up for, whether from the school itself, player development standpoint, the people, like you were sold something that's not real. Maybe what you thought was going to be real, but it's not real. Like um, I can empathize to that, right? I think there's another piece of okay, legitimate reasons, like a coaching staff changes, whether it's your position coach, um, especially whether it's the head coach. There's sometimes like I think what people kind of lose out on, Ben, is sometimes it's not even the player choosing to transfer. It's the coach coming in who says, "Hey, we're clearing like bringing my guys in, or we're playing the port." So it's not always the players. I don't even want to say fault, right? But it's not even like he's not initiating all the time when he's transferring. So a coaching change is real. I think maybe you do. You're in your sophomore year. You've worked extremely hard. There's a ton of competition. You haven't gotten the opportunity. Okay, well, like you want to play this game. You love this game. You've got passion for this game. You're going to your junior year. It's like, okay, I think, I'm not saying jump ship after fall your freshman year, but if it's after the spring of your sophomore year, I think it's something worthy of conversation, right? Another reason, maybe you are on scholarship, and whether it's the same staff or new staff, they say, hey, we got to take some of this away. We got to give this to the next guy, or it's pulled completely. Like that impacts everything, right? And or maybe just again, situation specific. Maybe like what you can afford has changed, whether it's your parents, guardians taking a new job, whatever it may be, or maybe it's I'm choosing a new academic major, and it's like I want to all of a sudden become an engineer, and the school doesn't have engineering after my fall of my sophomore, whatever it may be, right? I think there are legitimate reasons, and I think we got to remember that it's not always just the player's decision to transfer. Sometimes they're put in the position where they have to transfer. And I think what it's important to understand, and what I hope the kids listening to this is, you've got to understand the landscape of what the portal is and what transferring is before you decide to enter it. And I don't think you should view transferring as an option until it needs to be an option, right? I think it's extremely challenging for most players. Like the number of players that go in, and it's especially I'm talking college baseball that like they were studs at wherever they played, and they're going in, and there's all these teams coming after. Like those guys are few and far between. For a lot of guys, it's extremely hard, and it's stressful, especially if you don't have any kind of experience. Like going somewhere to play without a resume can be extremely challenging. And in reality, most guys, the NCAA put out a study, I think it was last year, of like the guys that go in, what happens? And like over 70% of Division I transfers go down in level or just leave the game, right? So it's like, okay, well, like if you go in and you think you hit 250 or you had a 5 ERA and you're trying to transfer up to the Power Five, or you're trying to transfer from Division II to mid-major, it's going to be harder than you think it's going to be. And I was talking with one of my coaching buddies a couple of weeks ago, and he is at the Division I level, and he said something that kind of rung true with me on the transfer process. He said, make sure in the game of musical chairs you have somewhere to sit, and I think that's real, that's prevalent, and I'll call it all of NCAA right now, but it's especially so from a college baseball standpoint.
Yeah, I definitely think in some situations, like the grass is always greener, where they're frustrated because the season didn't go how they wanted it to, but you have to be able to piece apart, hey, was this because this developmental situation was not what it needed to be for you, or was it because you just had a bad season, or you didn't execute, didn't perform? Like sometimes it is like on the player where they just didn't perform, and now you need to make a bet on yourself to, okay, I know that over the next year I can make that adjustment. I can add the 2 miles an hour. I can reduce my walk rate by 5%. Like I can make the adjustment that I need to do to come back and perform at this exact same place next year. Or is it the actual coaching staff standing in your way, where you now don't see eye to eye, or the strength coach is not letting you do what you need to do, or you don't have enough time to do the throwing program you need to do? Like, is there something actually in your way of development, or are you being given all the tools you need to develop, and you just didn't execute this season for whatever reason? You just didn't have a great year, and because you weren't having a great year, you just didn't get the playing time you wanted. But the opportunity's still there next year if you execute on the plan. So I always felt every single year, the reason I stayed at Maryland was because I knew that I wasn't good enough yet. Like I knew that, hey, I'm a mid-80s lefty who throws like one pitch for kind of strikes sometimes. Like I just wasn't good enough, but I felt like I had the tools at my disposal to get there the next year. The next year I'm an upper 80s, 87 to 90 lefty, still have one pitch kind of for strikes sometimes, but like I'm doing well in inner squads, and like I got a couple innings, and like, okay, I'm still giving the tools to continue developing. So I stayed there because I was looking at it from the long-term perspective of like, if I need to throw 95, 2 pitches for strikes, get drafted, like I'm just going to put myself in the best environment to get there at the end of 4 years. Whether that's mix and matching a bunch of schools or staying at one school, like I didn't care as much. I do think I would have developed faster if I had gotten more playing time, but I still felt every single year that I was being given enough opportunity that if I put the pieces together, I was going to get the playing time. I didn't feel like anybody was like cheating me out of actually getting on the field. So I still made incremental progress every year. Finally, by my senior year, I was legitimately good enough, and so I got the opportunity because now I was good enough, and then it all worked out.
For sure.
So I think being able to kind of piece apart the reasons and not just say like, okay, I had a bad year, have to immediately transfer, because the grass isn't always greener, like you said. You're going to probably go down a level, and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what you need, but maybe you have unrealistic expectations about what's on the other side.
Yeah. No, that's well said. That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that.
So to kind of finish out here, I did want to ask about some of the resources that you spent time putting together. And I think that's where a lot of people probably do know you from Twitter, from your social media, and you putting out a lot of really kind of unique recruiting advice. But if you want to just kind of plug and talk through a couple of your resources right now, just for any high school players listening, or any college players considering transferring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So on Twitter, it's @SoWhatNextPitch is where you can find me. I write tweets and threads primarily about the recruiting process in college baseball. In season, I'm not active really at all. My 100% of my focus is on our players, on our program, and but I will be tweeting again soon. As the season comes to a close, and that's where you can find me @SoWhatNextPitch. And if you want to learn more, collegebaseballrecruiting.net is my website. And I've built an on-demand video-based course to help players, families through the recruiting process. So with that, it's just under 3 hours in completion, but it's a collection of the best advice that I have on the subject from start to finish. And again, if they want to learn more about that, collegebaseballrecruiting.net.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I saw some of the like email templates and how to basically go through every step of the process. So for those who have really limited experience of kind of what to expect, I think that's a great a great resource from everything that I've seen. So appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you being on. And again, thanks for the time.
Ben, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ian.